About a year ago, I was renting this cheap apartment on the first floor of an old two-story building, decent neighborhood near downtown. Windows faced a small shared courtyard where residents parked their cars, just an asphalt lot with space for maybe 8 to 10 vehicles. I didn't have a car, biked, or took the bus to work, but I'd see neighbors coming and going at different times. One Wednesday in mid-July, I got home from work around 6 p.m., went inside, changed clothes, walked to the window to open it because the room was stuffy after the hot day. Glanced down at the courtyard and noticed this black sedan parked directly across from my windows. Old model, maybe year 2000. Windows tinted so dark they were almost black. Engine was running. I could hear that low idle. I figured one of the neighbors got a new car or someone was visiting. Didn't think much about it. About 15 minutes later, the car drove off. I saw it leave the courtyard and forgot about it. Next day at work was the same as always. I'm a receptionist at a dental clinic, 9 to 5:30. Same bus, same coffee, same faces. My life back then was very copy-paste, which I actually liked because it felt safe. Thursday, I came home around 6 again. I remember checking my phone at the door. 5:58. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, walked to the window to get some air in. Looked down. Same black car, same spot, engine running, front pointed at my windows. Seeing it a second day, same time, it suddenly didn't feel like nothing. I stood there watching for maybe 10 minutes, trying to see through those tinted windows, but they were just black mirrors. No doors opened, nobody walked up to it. Courtyard stayed totally still. After about 15 minutes, like the day before, the sedan pulled out and left. On the bus Friday morning, I couldn't stop replaying it. Black car, engine always on, shows up exactly when I get home, leaves right after. It didn't feel random anymore. The only fixed thing there at that time was me. That thought stuck so bad it made my stomach hurt. Around lunch, I called my manager, told her I felt sick and asked to leave early. She said okay. I got home at 5 p.m., a full hour earlier than usual. Courtyard was empty, no black car. I sat on the couch pretending to watch something, but I kept checking the time. At 5:30, when I'd normally be leaving work, I grabbed my purse and keys, walked out like I was going somewhere, went to the corner store and wandered around for 20 minutes, barely looking at anything. At 5:55, I headed back. As I turned into the courtyard, I did a quick scan. Still empty. When I actually reached the building door, I checked again, just in case. No sedan. I went inside, took the stairs kind of slow so I wouldn't look like I was rushing, then went straight to my window. The black car was there, parked directly across from my apartment, engine running. It hadn't been there literally 30 seconds earlier when I came through the courtyard. Whoever was driving either pulled in the second I disappeared inside or was waiting nearby and timed it. That was the moment it stopped feeling like paranoia and started feeling like someone had my schedule written down. My hands were shaking enough that I didn't want to stay alone, so I went upstairs to my neighbor Carol. She was maybe 50, lived right above me, kind of the unofficial building guard. She always knew who was parked where, who was fighting, who was moving out. If anyone had noticed that car before, it would be her. I told her everything, trying to keep my voice level. Wednesday, Thursday, leaving work early, coming back at my usual time, car suddenly there. She didn't laugh or brush it off. She just got this tight look and said, "Okay, that is weird. Let's go see who it is. Maybe it's just some guy waiting on someone and he doesn't realize how this looks." We went down together. As soon as we pushed open the entrance door, I could hear the engine louder. We walked toward the car like we were just heading to the dumpsters, not staring. The second we got maybe 5 meters from the entrance, before we even turned fully toward it, the sedan shifted. Engine revved slightly, reverse lights flashed, and it started backing out of the spot. Up close like that, I could see part of the plate. I repeated the numbers and letters in my head, over and over, while I fumbled out my phone and typed them into a note. The car swung around the courtyard, and rolled out through the gate without stopping. Carol watched it go and muttered, "Yeah, no, that's not normal." I told her I wanted to call the police right then. Carol thought for a second and said, "Look, I'm not saying never call, but right now, what do we tell them? A car parked here and left. They'll say it's not illegal, and maybe they don't even send a patrol. Let's see if it comes back tomorrow. If it does, we call right away." I hated that she sounded reasonable. I also didn't want to be the crazy 23-year-old complaining about a car, so I agreed to wait one more day. Saturday, I decided to do the same test. I left my place at 5 p.m. on purpose, walked slow loops around the neighborhood for an hour, texted a friend about random stuff so I wouldn't chicken out and go home early. At exactly 6, I turned onto my street. The black car was already in its usual spot. To reach my door, I had to walk right past it on the sidewalk. The engine was running. I kept my eyes forward, every part of me screaming to look, and as I drew level with the front bumper, the headlights suddenly flashed twice. 2 short blinks, deliberate, like a signal. The driver had seen me and hit the lights on purpose. My legs went weak, but I didn't stop. I walked into the building as calmly as I could manage, then bolted up the stairs, heart pounding so hard it made me feel sick. Inside my apartment, I shut the door, locked the handle lock, turned the deadbolt, slid the chain across with shaking hands, and immediately called the police. Officer showed up about 40 minutes later. Young cop, maybe 30. He took my story seriously. He came into my apartment first, asked me to walk him through everything from the beginning while he stood near the window and looked down into the courtyard. I told him about the 3 evenings, the timing, how the car disappeared as soon as Carol and I walked toward it, the headlights flashing at me that last time. He kept asking if there was anyone who might want to scare me. An ex, someone from work, anyone I'd turned down. I told him no. Nothing like that. My life was pretty boring, which was kind of the whole reason this freaked me out so much. He wrote down my statement, took the plate number from my phone, asked for the make and model as best as I could describe it. We went outside together, and he walked around the courtyard, checked the spots, even looked at the small camera over the building entrance, but he said he couldn't access the footage himself. That would have to go through the landlord. He gave me his card, said if the car came back I should call right away, even if it left before a patrol could get there. Before he left, he reminded me that, technically, parking in the courtyard wasn't illegal, but he agreed the pattern was worrying. The car didn't show up again that evening. I kept going to the window every few minutes until it got dark. Then I moved a chair so I could sit and still see the lot without standing right in front of the glass like a target. Nothing. Just my neighbors' regular cars, people coming home with groceries, some kids cutting through on scooters. Around midnight, I finally went to bed, phone right next to my pillow, ring volume all the way up. 3 days later, the same officer called me back. His tone was different, more careful. He said he'd run the plate. The car was registered to an elderly man named Walter Green, who had died 2 years ago from a heart attack. Registration hadn't been renewed since then. No transfer of ownership, nothing. On paper, the car just stopped existing. That meant whoever was driving it now had either bought it under the table and never filed anything, or they were using stolen plates, or both. I asked if they could track it somehow, pull up traffic cameras or something. He said with how old the registration was and no recent tickets, there wasn't much they could do unless the car showed up again and patrol caught it in person. He told me again to call if I saw it, and to think about staying with friends or family for a while if I felt unsafe. I didn't really have anywhere else to go, so I stayed put. For a whole week after that call, the black sedan didn't appear in the courtyard. I watched for it every day anyway. I tried to act normal, went to work, talked to patients, listened to my co-workers gossip, but any time I saw a dark car outside the clinic, my chest tightened. By the end of the week, with nothing happening, part of me started to believe maybe the cop's presence had scared the driver off. Maybe it had just been some creep who got bored and moved on. Then, one morning on the bus to work, We turned onto a street 2 blocks from my house. I was half asleep, looking out the window without really seeing anything, when a familiar shape caught my eye. Same old black sedan, same dark tint on the windows, rolling slowly down the opposite lane. It wasn't following the bus, wasn't turning after us, just moving along like any other car. But my body recognized it before my brain did. My stomach dropped. As we passed it, I twisted in my seat, trying to see the plate through the window glare. I couldn't read it clearly, but I didn't need to. I knew it was the same car. It felt like whoever was driving just wanted to check if I still lived near that corner, if I was still on my usual route. A month later, I moved out of that apartment to a different neighborhood farther from downtown. Told Carol and the other neighbors I'd found a place closer to work and cheaper. That part was true enough. I did pick somewhere that cut my commute. I just left out the part where I was leaving because of a car. I planned the move fast, signed the new lease, and scheduled everything so there wouldn't be a long overlap. During that last week, I kept my blinds mostly closed and paid attention to every engine sound in the courtyard. The black sedan never came back while I was packing or carrying boxes, or at least I never saw it. On my last day there, Carol hugged me, told me to text her my new address. I told her I'd send it later and change the subject. Sometimes now, even in the new place, I still look over my shoulder in parking lots, checking for black sedans with dark-tinted windows sitting with their engines running. I think about that car more often than I admit to anyone. I wonder who it was and what they wanted. If it was someone I'd met without realizing, a patient's relative, someone from the bus, someone who'd seen me in that courtyard and decided to keep track of me. Or if it was completely random and I just happened to walk into their pattern. The police never found whoever was driving it or why they were watching my schedule so closely. And that's what sticks with me the most. Not knowing what their end goal was, only knowing they were patient and precise enough to show up at exactly 6 p.m., flash the headlights at me, and then circle back weeks later to see if I was still there. Now I keep my address as private as I can, don't post about my routines or locations, and I change my route home from work whenever I can. Maybe it sounds paranoid, but after that, being careful feels less like overreacting and more like the only control I have. Four years ago, my younger sister Kaylee was working overnight shifts at a 24-hour diner on the edge of Middleton, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She was 19, saving for college. I was 23, and living on my own. Our parents hated her being out that late, so the rule was simple: no walking home alone. Dad usually picked her up. That Friday, our parents were driving to the next state to visit my grandma and asked me to cover the pickup. I lived 15 minutes away, had my own car, so I said yes. I left my apartment a little before 5:30 and pulled into the diner's small front lot at about 10 to 6. It was still dark. The diner sat in an industrial strip, warehouses and auto shops around it, all closed. I parked facing the front windows so she'd see my headlights, left the engine running, and texted, "Here, front lot." She replied she was finishing cleanup and to give her a few minutes. I locked my phone, turned the radio down low, and started scrolling, still glancing up every so often to check the door. A dark sedan was parked across the street, headlights off. I noticed it almost immediately but didn't think much of it. Figured someone waiting for a ride. The car looked old, dark gray or black, hard to tell in that light. It just sat there, no movement I could see. Every time I glanced up, it was in the same spot. Kaylee texted she was finishing cleanup, would be out in 5 minutes. I put my phone in the cup holder and looked in the mirrors out of habit. The street was empty in both directions. Maybe 7 or 8 minutes passed. The diner door opened. Kaylee came out, waved at me, started walking toward my car looking at her phone. She looked tired, ready to go home. And at that exact moment, the sedan door opened. A man got out, tall, broad-shouldered, dark jacket with a hood. He closed his door and didn't look around. He didn't head toward the diner. He started quickly crossing the street, purposeful, his eyes locked on Kaylee. I remember sitting there for maybe one heartbeat, telling myself I was overreacting, that he was just cutting across toward the entrance. But he angled straight toward the space between my car and hers like he already knew exactly where she was going. I can't explain what happened next. It wasn't a rational decision. It was instinct, a jolt of panic that made me lock onto him. Every part of me was screaming that he was going for Kaylee and that I had seconds. My hand was on the door handle before I'd even processed that thought. I jumped out of my car so fast I don't remember opening it and shouted across the lot, "Kaylee, get in the car, now!" My voice came out higher and harsher than I meant, enough that she flinched. My sister looked up from her phone, eyes wide, staring at me, not understanding. For half a second she just stood there between us. The man sped up, went from fast walk to a run. Kaylee's eyes flicked from me to him and back, and I saw the moment it clicked. Her body tensed and she bolted toward my car, still not knowing exactly what was happening, but trusting I wouldn't yell like that for nothing. He was running after her, distance between them closing, one arm reaching out like he was going to grab her. I felt this cold, clear fear. If he got hold of her, I might not get another chance. I scrambled back into the driver's seat, half falling in, yanking my door shut. Kaylee yanked open the passenger door and jumped in, one knee still on the seat, her backpack hitting the dashboard. In that second, everything narrowed down to one thing I could control. I didn't look at him, didn't check where he was. I just needed Kaylee inside and the car sealed for a few more seconds. Only. I slammed my thumb on the central lock button, securing all doors at once. The man was maybe 10 meters away, close enough that I could see his hand already lifting toward Kaylee's door handle as he ran along the side of the car. I slammed my foot on the gas with the gear still in reverse, panicking and not thinking it through. The car jerked backward hard, my shoulder hitting the seat, Kaylee screaming my name. I spun the wheel sharply just to get us away from him, tires bumping over the edge of the parking spot. For a split second I lost sight of him in the mirrors, and that scared me more than anything, not knowing exactly where he was. I forced myself to slow my foot enough to slam the brake, shove the gear into drive, and then I floored it out of the parking lot toward the main road. I heard Kaylee gasp, "What are you doing?" But I didn't answer. I was too focused on not hitting anything and just getting distance. In the corner of my eye, right as we pulled out, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, turned toward us, not chasing, just watching the car go. There was something about the way he stood there, like he hadn't expected me to react that fast. Kaylee was breathing hard, seatbelt half twisted across her chest, hands pressed against the dashboard. She started yelling over the engine, asking what happened, who that was, what was going on. I realized my hands were shaking on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard I felt slightly dizzy. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his headlights behind us, but the road stayed empty. After about 3 blocks, when I was sure no one was following, I forced myself to ease off the gas. My voice was unsteady when I finally answered her. "Kaylee, he got out of his car exactly when you stepped outside," I said. "He wasn't going to the diner. He was walking straight toward you, right to your door. He sped up when you did." She stared at me, still confused, shaking her head. "You don't know that," she argued. "Maybe he was just cutting through. Maybe he wanted coffee. You freaked out for nothing." I told her flat out that I didn't believe that. I reminded her how empty the street was, how long the car had been sitting there, how he'd locked onto her, and then ran. She went quiet first, looking out the window, chewing on her lip like she does when she's thinking. Then she started arguing again, more defensive this time, saying I scared her worse than he did, that maybe I'd misread everything because I was tired. I didn't push back after that. There was this heavy tension between us the whole rest of the drive home, both of us replaying those few seconds in our heads, neither of us completely sure we could explain it in a way that would sound serious to someone else. I pulled up in front of our parents' house and put the car in park. The sky was just starting to lighten. I told Kaylee to text me as soon as she was inside. She rolled her eyes a little but agreed, grabbed her bag, and got out. I waited until I heard the front door unlock and saw the porch light come on. She went in, turned, waved once through the curtains, then shut the door. Only then did I pull away. I didn't want to upset her more by staying, but the more I thought about his face, the more certain I got that this wasn't just some random guy headed for coffee. A couple blocks from my own place, I pulled over on a side street and sat there for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. Then I called the non-emergency police number. When the dispatcher answered, I told her I wanted to report suspicious behavior outside a business and forced myself to give a clear, detailed statement. I gave the diner's address, the time, explained that a man in a dark sedan had been sitting there at least 15 minutes with his lights off, then got out and walked directly at my sister when she left work. I described him as best I could. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hooded jacket, maybe late 20s or 30s. I told her I couldn't see his face clearly, but that the way he moved made me sure he had a purpose. I described the car, the direction we drove off, Kaylee's overnight schedule, everything I could remember. The dispatcher took it seriously, asked follow-up questions, and said they'd send a patrol to check the area and file a report. The next day our parents got back from my grandma's, and I sat them down at the kitchen table. I didn't soften it. I told them exactly what happened in that parking lot, that I was certain he was waiting for her. Dad's face went red, and Mom kept putting her hand over her mouth. Dad said there was no way Kaylee was ever working a night shift there again. When we called her into the room, he flat out told her he wanted her to quit. Kaylee pushed back immediately. She said everyone was overreacting, that the guy never touched her, that technically nothing happened. She reminded them that she needed the job, that she'd been saving, that getting a new one wouldn't be easy. Mom said they'd help with money. Dad said they'd drive her to and from work if she got a different job, but they didn't want her at that diner overnight anymore. It turned into this long argument that went in circles. She finally agreed to at least start looking for a day job, which calmed them down a little. But I could tell she still thought I'd blown everything out of proportion. For the next week, Mom insisted that Dad or I take turns picking Kaylee up and dropping her off even during the day, and she kept peeking through the blinds whenever she heard a car outside. Kaylee complained about feeling smothered, but she still got in the car every shift without fighting it. I called the police station 2 days after my report, and they told me they'd had patrol cars swing through the diner area during the overnight hours but hadn't seen anyone matching my description or the sedan. That scared me in a different way, because it meant he either gave up, or, more likely in my mind, changed where he was watching from. Kaylee eventually got hired for a part-time day position at the local library about 2 months later. As soon as she had that lined up, she put in her notice at the diner. Dad was relieved, Mom almost cried, and Kaylee joked that now no one could accuse her of being reckless. After that summer, she moved to another state for college. The diner job became one of those things she mentioned as a funny, awful night shift story, and whenever she brought up that morning, she'd roll her eyes about how dramatic I'd been. Every time, I just let it go instead of starting that fight again. It has been 4 years now. Police never called me back with any updates, and I stopped expecting them to. I still have that report number saved in my notes. Kaylee's finishing college in another state, living with roommates, posting about normal stuff, exams and parties and work. She still honestly believes I just got worked up that day, that the guy was a random customer, that it was all a strange coincidence. I don't know who that man was, whether he had watched her on other nights, whether he tried again with someone else after the police patrols stopped. But I am still sure that if I hadn't screamed when I did and turned everything chaotic for those few seconds, something terrible could have happened in that empty parking lot in the pre-dawn darkness. "8 hours behind the wheel, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I was driving home from college for break, running on gas station coffee and cheap snacks, and I knew if I didn't stop, I was going to start drifting lanes. When I saw a faded diner sign near an exit, I took it without thinking. The parking lot was mostly empty, a couple of pickups and 2 semis, nothing weird. Inside was the standard roadside setup. Sticky floor, buzzing lights, smell of fryer grease. A waitress with a messy bun told me I could sit anywhere, so I took a booth by the window so I could keep an eye on my car. I ordered a sandwich with fries and a soda, plugged my phone into a power bank, and started scrolling through Instagram. My whole plan was simple. Eat, wake up a little, then knock out the last 4 hours home. About 10 minutes later, right when I started wondering if they'd forgotten my order, I heard a chair scrape hard near the entrance. At first, I figured it was just someone annoyed about cold food or a wrong check. Then a man's voice cut through the room, loud, angry, not just irritated. I looked over and saw this guy, mid-40s, built like he poured concrete for a living, standing way too close to my waitress. He had one big hand wrapped around her uniform sleeve, tugging her toward the door while she tried to pull back. "We're leaving! Right now!" he barked, loud enough that everyone in the place heard him. She yanked at her arm. "Let go of me, Rick. I'm working. You promised you wouldn't come here." That's when it clicked. This wasn't some random customer. He wasn't here for food at all. Even from my booth, I could smell the alcohol on him. He had that loose, unsteady sway, eyes glassy, words just a little slurred but full of anger. She kept saying she had a shift to finish, that they could talk later, that he needed to leave. Another waitress, older, came over and told him he had to let her go and sit down or get out before they called the cops. He whipped his free arm toward her in this wide swing. He didn't connect, but it was close enough that she flinched back fast. That was the point where sitting and pretending it wasn't happening felt worse than getting involved. I slid out of my booth with my phone in my hand, staying a few steps back so I wasn't just rushing a drunk guy twice my size. A couple other people stood up too. One of the truckers at the counter turned on his stool and just stared at Rick, jaw clenched. The kitchen door swung open and the manager came out, wiping his hands on a towel as he walked over. He was an older guy, gray mustache, small, but he moved like this wasn't the first time he'd had to deal with someone like Rick. "Sir, you need to leave," he said, calm but firm. "Let her go and walk out, or we're calling the police." No yelling, no swearing, just that. Rick glared at him over the waitress's shoulder. "Mind your own business," he snapped. The manager didn't back down. "This is my business. Let her go. You're done here." I saw people around me already unlocking their phones. I had 911 pulled up without even thinking about it. For a second it looked like Rick might actually listen. His grip loosened just a little. Then he suddenly dropped her arm, stepped in, and shoved the manager with both hands straight in the chest. The manager flew backwards and hit the back of his head on the metal counter behind him. The sound made my stomach twist. This dull crack followed by the thump of his body hitting the floor. For maybe half a second the whole diner went silent. Then people started screaming. The older waitress ran to him and dropped to her knees, yelling his name and trying to roll him onto his side. A guy at a nearby table said he was calling 911 and started shouting the address into his phone. One of the truckers took a step toward Rick like he was about to grab him, then hesitated when Rick spun back to the first waitress. Rick stared at the manager on the ground like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. That shock lasted maybe a heartbeat. Then his face hardened. He grabbed the waitress by the upper arm, harder this time, and yanked her toward the door. She stumbled and started screaming, "No, I don't want to! Help me!" I moved to the end of the row of booths and stepped in front of them, hands up, not touching him, just blocking the path. "Hey man, stop, just wait." "She doesn't want to go," I said. I wasn't trying to fight him. I just wanted to slow him down long enough for more people to step in, or for sirens to show up outside. He didn't even break stride. He drove his elbow into my chest and shoulder so hard it knocked the air out of me. I slammed into the side of a booth and slid down, my phone skidding across the floor. By the time I could take a breath again, he had her halfway through the doorway, dragging her while she grabbed at the frame and anything else she could catch. One of the truckers, huge guy with a beard, jumped off his stool and ran after them, yelling at Rick to let her go. A couple of us followed him out, leaving the manager on the floor with the other waitress still screaming for help into the phone. The sudden shift from the bright diner to the colder air outside made everything feel unreal for a second, but Rick never slowed. By the time we hit the edge of the parking lot, he already had the passenger door of a dark blue Ford F-150 yanked open and was shoving her inside, one hand locked around her arm as he forced her into the seat. The trucker yelled at me, "Write this down. TXR8, that's all I got. Too dark. Dark blue F-150. I already had my phone in my hand, so I opened my notes app and typed it in exactly like he said. My fingers were shaking so much I had to slow down and check it twice. A second later, the engine roared and the truck ripped out of the parking spot, swung hard toward the road, and shot off. For a moment, I saw the waitress's silhouette through the passenger window, like she was twisting away from him. And then the truck straightened, and the taillights were just shrinking red dots until they disappeared past the highway ramp. The trucker jogged a few steps after it, then stopped because there was nothing else to chase. We were on foot, and he was already gone. When we turned back toward the diner, reality hit harder. Through the glass, we could see the manager still on the floor, not moving, blood spread under the back of his head where it had hit the metal counter. The older waitress was kneeling beside him, pressing a pile of napkins and a dish towel against the wound with both hands, crying and yelling something into her phone on speaker. A couple customers hovered nearby, asking if they should do CPR or move him, and she was shouting, "No, don't touch him. They said don't move him." We walked back inside because standing in the parking lot felt like pretending it wasn't our problem. Someone said 911 was already on the way. I stood near the door, breathing too fast, staring at the spot where he'd landed, and hearing that dull crack in my head over and over. Police showed up maybe 15 minutes later, lights bouncing through the windows and across the booths. An ambulance pulled in right behind them. The EMTs went straight for the manager, checked his breathing and pulse, fitted a neck brace on him, and carefully moved him onto a stretcher. The older waitress tried to follow them out until one of the officers gently held her back and started asking questions. Everything felt slow and fast at the same time, people talking over each other. Plates still sitting on tables like this was just a pause in regular service. Later, one of the cooks told me the hospital said he had a concussion and a fracture, and they were keeping him for a while. Right then, all we knew was he was unconscious and bleeding and being rolled out the door. Two officers pulled the trucker and me to the side and started taking our statements. We walked them through the whole thing from when Rick walked in, to him grabbing her, to the shove, to the truck. The trucker gave the partial plate and repeated the make and color. I showed them my note so they could copy it down. One of the cops read it back out loud. Dark blue Ford F-150, Texas plate starting with TXR8, and scribbled it in his notebook. He didn't look excited or hopeful when he said it. After they talked to everyone else, that same officer came back over to me and lowered his voice. "Look," he said, "there's thousands of Fords like that in Texas. Without a full plate, it's tough. We'll run what we've got. But this isn't one of those TV things where we punch it in and get one name." I just nodded, because what else was I supposed to say to that? One officer quietly added, almost like he was trying to make it sound less bad, "Most likely she knows him, since he came to her work. If she wants to, she'll file a report herself. That makes it easier for us to move on it." Something about that bothered me more than anything else that night. Like all of this, the blood on the floor and her being dragged out didn't officially count until she asked them to care. When they finally let us leave, I walked out to my car, opened the door, and immediately leaned over and threw up in the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I managed to get in and lock the doors. I sat there in the driver's seat with the engine off and called my sister because I couldn't stand the idea of being alone with my own thoughts. As soon as she picked up, I just started talking, telling her everything in a messy, out-of-order way. How I'd been scrolling Instagram, how he'd grabbed the waitress, how the manager hit his head, how helpless it felt watching that truck disappear. My voice kept breaking and I had to stop a few times to pull myself together. She kept saying I'd done what I could, that I wasn't a cop or security, that most people would have stayed in their booths and pretended not to see anything. I heard her, but it didn't really land. I just needed someone on the line so I didn't feel like I was stuck back in that moment alone. I never found out what happened to that waitress, if they ever caught Rick, or what the manager's recovery looked like. I drove home that night because I didn't know what else to do, then spent the next week avoiding the news, terrified I'd see her picture in a headline about a missing woman or a homicide and recognize the uniform from the diner. What sticks with me is how fast it all flipped. One minute I was a tired college kid eating fries, half awake, killing time on my phone, and the next I was watching a man get carried out on a stretcher and a woman forced into a truck I couldn't stop. People always say they'd be a hero in those situations, but standing there, feeling that drunk guy's elbow slam me into a booth, I realized there's this invisible line between helping and getting yourself seriously hurt, or worse. And even now, when I lie awake and replay it and try to imagine grabbing a weapon or blocking the truck or doing something bigger, every version ends with someone else laid out on that floor, maybe me. And as much as I hate it, I honestly don't know what more I could have done. After the army, I worked for a private security company that specialized in industrial sites and abandoned buildings. Our best contract was with the city, patrolling structures marked for demolition to keep out vandals, homeless, or scrappers looking for metal. It wasn't glamorous, but after deployment, I liked that the worst thing I usually faced was a drunk or a bored teenager. One night around midnight, dispatch sent me to an old 8-story office building downtown. Anonymous tip about homeless setting up camp inside. The place had been empty 5 years. Windows boarded, entrances sealed, but experienced people always found ways in. I parked in the loading bay, logged my arrival, walked to the main doors, and checked my handheld. Signal came through loud and clear. Dispatcher read back my call sign without asking for a repeat. Standard route there was just first 2 floors, quick loop of the main corridors, but with a live complaint I was supposed to check higher, at least up to the mid-levels. Inside I took the usual path. First floor, lobby, reception desk, plastic sheeting, all the same mess I'd seen a dozen times. No fresh trash, no disturbed dust around the doors. Second floor matched it. Long corridor of closed offices with old city seals taped across the handles. I checked a couple at random, tape still tight. I kept the radio clipped high on my vest, volume up so dispatch would cut through if something else came in. Back at the stairwell, I hesitated a second, listening. Sometimes in those empty buildings you can hear people 2 floors away. That time I heard nothing but distant traffic. I told dispatch I was heading higher and got a lazy, "Copy, keep talking to me." I went up to the 3rd floor, and as soon as I pushed the door, I saw the dust near the threshold was scuffed up, not smooth like last time. Along the 3rd floor corridor were faint smear marks at hand height, someone feeling their way in the dark. No new bottles or food, but the floor told its own story. All the doors I tested were still sealed, so whoever had come through either stayed quiet or didn't stay long. I slowed down, shifted my flashlight so I could use it as a baton if I had to, and headed for the 4th. 4th floor, I immediately saw one office door standing open, seal torn and hanging by a single strip of tape. The tape itself looked newer, clear instead of yellowed. Inside, my light picked up fresh footprints in the thick dust, different sizes, so at least 2 or 3 people. In the corner were cigarette butts, a couple of empty water bottles, and food wrappers piled in a cardboard tray like someone was trying not to leave trash in the hall. Someone had used that office recently, probably within a day. I keyed the radio, kept my voice low, told dispatch I had clear signs of occupation, and was proceeding carefully. He offered to send a car. I said to hold off so we didn't spook anyone into sprinting blind through stairwells. I moved farther down the corridor, and that's where I found the first passage. Someone had punched a rough hole through the drywall between two interior offices, just big enough for an adult to crawl through. From the chipped paint and dust around the edges, it wasn't brand new, but it wasn't old either. I checked the ceiling grid and corners, saw no one waiting, then crouched and stuck my head through. Next office, same dust footprints, and on the opposite wall another ragged cutout leading farther in. I squeezed through into the next office and found another passage, then another, short stretches of wall left standing like pillars between gaps. Someone had built a real maze inside the building, letting them move between rooms while avoiding corridors and security cameras completely. From a tactical side, it made sense. They could hear anyone coming down the main hallway and shift 3 rooms over before you ever opened a door. I stayed low, one hand on my radio, one on the flashlight, moving slow so I didn't rip my vest on the drywall edges. I checked my radio again, still working, and I reported every turn to dispatch so he could mark my route on the building plan. I went deeper into the labyrinth, finding passages one after another, starting to notice graffiti on the inner walls, crude territory markers, letters and arrows pointing directions that didn't match the official room numbers anymore. The building was big. I knew there were about 50 offices per floor, and from the way I kept zigzagging, I guessed the maze covered maybe a third of them, mostly the quiet side away from the elevators. In the far corner, I finally found the center, a larger room where they'd knocked out more walls. There were 3 dirty mattresses against one side, a pile of canned food stacked neatly, and a heap of clothes. On a makeshift crate table sat a metal ashtray with a mound of cigarette ash that still felt warm through my glove when I tapped it. The place had been used very recently, maybe a couple hours ago, which meant whoever built this likely knew I was in their tunnel system. I checked the radio one more time, and now the signal was weak. Dispatcher's voice breaking up with static. Concrete walls blocked the signal harder than I expected. Then I heard voices, low at first, then clearer as they bounced off the concrete. 2 men talking, footsteps with them. It hit me I wasn't checking an old camp. I was in the middle of someone's active spot. I was in that maze with bad radio, no partner, nobody who knew where I was. If they walked into that room and saw me over their stuff, it would turn into a confrontation. I'd cleared enough rooms in the army to know I was on the wrong side of this. I wasn't there as a cop or a soldier, a private guard whose job was to find trouble and call it in, not fight a group in tight space. I shut off my flashlight and stood still, listening. The voices were on my floor and getting closer, headed toward the side with the maze. One of them laughed, another told him to quit it. I backed toward the last hole in the drywall, placing each step so I didn't kick anything. When my boot hit the rough edge, I dropped down, slid through, and moved to the next gap. Every few rooms there was another opening, and I used them like a path. The voices stayed somewhere off to my right. I kept going until I found the door to the corridor, went through, turned for the stairwell, and ran as soon as I saw the exit sign. At the bottom, I hit the first floor door, cut through the lobby, and pushed out into the loading bay. By my truck, with the radio strong again, I called dispatch and reported. I told him I'd found a maze of cut-through offices on the 4th floor with mattresses, food, clothes, a warm ashtray, and several male voices up there. He told me not to go back inside and said he was calling the police. He asked about entrances, weapons, and vehicles. I told him I hadn't seen guns or cars, but whoever was inside was organized enough to build that layout and stockpile supplies. A patrol car rolled up. The officers took my statement, and they locked down the doors. Next day, I came on shift and saw the result. Patrol cars and a tactical unit had the block closed, officers at the doors and behind vehicles. An officer with a megaphone stood at the entrance telling anyone inside to come out with their hands up. After a short wait, the door opened and one man stepped out, then another, until 6 of them were on the sidewalk in cuffs. No chase, just 6 guys who knew they were boxed in. Later, detectives told us they were using the building as a warehouse for stolen electronics and tools until a bulk buyer was ready. The maze let them move between a group of offices without stepping into the main corridors or in front of cameras. I got a commendation, but what stayed in my head wasn't the praise. It was how close I'd come to walking into them. After that night, I refused to clear empty buildings by myself, unless there was no other option. It's too easy to step into someone else's layout and lose radio contact. That ashtray is what I remember most. The ash was warm when I touched it, which means they'd been smoking in that room before I arrived. If I'd reached the center 20 minutes earlier, I would have been in a dead-end room, out of signal, face to face with 6 men who thought they were safe and had no reason to let a security guard walk back out.